Good evening. I want to thank you for your presence here. I want to thank the two organizations that have invited me to have the honor to come to Poland and speak to the distinguished audience. I regret not to be able to express myself in your beautiful language, expression of one of the oldest and richest cultures in Europe. And therefore, I also thank the translator, thanks to whom we are going to be able to communicate. And it's not the silent person, he's the one that is talking to each other. I will give my lecture on a topic that was in fact suggested by the people who at Gazeta Wyborcza invited me. I proposed all kind of other things, but they were interested in something which I hope you will, because this is exactly what I have been working on in recent years. And this is my new book, which is not published yet, but it will be published next month at Oxford University Press and then translated in other languages, which is a book about communication and power. And therefore the title is Communication and Power. I try to keep it simple. It's complicated enough once you try to read it. But the reason I'm mentioning the topic in those terms is because given the fact that unfortunately I have not been able to come to Poland earlier, this is my first talk in Poland ever. If you are not interested at all in communication and power, but you are interested in something else that you think I could have done some research on it, I welcome any kind of comments and questions, criticism that you may have on any topic, as long as it's within the boundaries of privacy. Now, this analysis of communication, technology, media, and power, which is the exact title of my lecture, in fact, tries to understand the dynamics of power in our society, in the network society. And of course, Poland is also, as the whole world is, because it's a global network society. And understanding power is absolutely essential, because power relationships are the foundational relationships of any society. Whoever has power defines the rules and institutions of society. So society becomes the expression of power. However, fortunately enough, there is not only one source of power or one set of interests in power. There is always power and counter-power. There is one rule in the history of humankind, is wherever there is domination, there is resistance to domination. And therefore things become more complicated, meaning that some people have power, others have less, but then there are conflicts, and then there are allocation of power resources. Some societies are more democratic, others less, but the whole system is highly dynamic. It's a constant struggle and negotiation at the same time. And from this struggle and this negotiation, the institutions of society emerge as an expression of compromises in terms of the values and interests that conflict with each other. Now, throughout history, communication and information have been the fundamental sources of power and counterpower, of domination and of social change. And this is because the fundamental battle for influence, for power in society, is the battle over the minds of the people. Whoever is able to shape our minds has power. Yes, there is also coercive power. But ultimately, this is not the fundamental power. Power that is exclusively based on violence or the threat of violence is weak. because if people start thinking massively otherwise, this power will not last. And as a matter of fact, you have very good history around that in Poland. So I would say that the fundamental use of power is based on shaping the minds rather than torturing the bodies, although both are present everywhere. Now, if power is a fundamental relationship in society, and if power is largely based, not uniquely based, but largely based on shaping the minds work through communication. That's what is distinctive of the human species, meaningful communication. And therefore, the ability to shape the processes of communication that lead to the shaping of the mind is where power lies. So fundamentally, in all societies, the control or ability or battles over communication and information is the fundamental battle over power. And in our society, that means over the forms of communication that are characteristic of our society, which are at the same time, and that's the novelty, the traditional mass media, although transformed in a digital age, but also the internet, mobile communication, and the new forms of communication. And that's what makes our society at the same time so complex and so interesting. Because historically, the sources of communication and information were highly controlled, always. Even in a world of plurality, of democracy, still, in order to reach people at large, that is, in order to engage in what is called the process of socialized communication, that is, communication that can reach the entire society or a large part of society, different from interpersonal communication. It ultimately went always through some media, the churches, the states, the restrictive press, and even in the mass media society, through government and corporations controlling the channels of communication. Which doesn't mean that the media have power. It means the media are the space where power is played out, where power is fought. You see, it's different. It's not the media corporations or the communication corporations that have the power. The power is much more complicated, but it's multiple sources of power. It's political power, it's corporate power, it's cultural power, religious power. But all these powers ultimately depend on what people think about it. And what people think depends on their communication environment. So the shaping of this communication environment is decisive for society at large. Now, if this is the case, what I would like to do in this lecture is, first of all, to start with the easy part, the part that social scientists have established a long time ago, which is the central role of mass media in the production of culture and therefore in the shaping of the minds, and how this links to politics, and then trying to show that in our society, politics is essentially media politics, which is easy to say, but the consequences of that are extraordinary, and I will try to show it. Media politics has, the fact that politics is media politics fundamentally, is connected, empirically connected, to the crisis of political legitimacy that we experience in the world, throughout the world. And I also will try to comment on that. But then what I observe is that there has been the emergence of a new form of communication related to the culture and technology of the network society around horizontal networks of communication, the emergence of what I call mass self-communication. I will try to explain. And then I will try to see how this mass self-communication, connected at the same time to the mass media world, explains the dynamics of social movements and insurgent politics in our world. So that's the roadmap of the lecture. First of all, the mass communication is still largely based on television, and not only for political purposes, for all the purposes. Television is still the main medium of communication. And in that sense, the media, who is and who is not, and what is and what is not on television, largely determines what people know or don't know. The first consequence of that is that the most important thing in terms of the capacity of the mass media to shape people's minds is not so much a particular message, but something more important, the absence of a message. What is not in television does not exist. Then there's a second level of determination, which is how what is shown in television is shown and proposed and analyzed, and how it's internalized by people. The first thing is dichotomic. Exists on television, does not exist on television, which means exists in the socialized mind or not. That's the first important thing. Second, then, television and other forms of mass communication, but talking about the main one, which is television, that means that to exist in the public mind, messages have to adapt to the television language, which has a specific type of message, which is based on images. Images, not just visual images, which what scientists call images, that is relationship to what the brain organizes in terms of images, which is a very simplified message. It's a much information simplified in one particular capsule of information. And that, in the case of television, fundamentally is a human face. So the first consequence of the media politics, the fact that it's going through television, is that the personalization of politics. Throughout the world, politics has become personalized because the message that people can capture, the message that people can immediately relate to, is a human face. Human face doesn't mean necessarily how handsome is the person or how she or he dresses. It means fundamentally what is conveyed by one particular person, the character, the persona. Now, it's the fact that it's personalized is fundamental for politics in general, because people in fact don't read political programs, they don't read platforms, the only thing that people know in terms of the messages of politics are the headlines of the media. This is throughout the world. And the headlines of the media are so diverse and often becomes very difficult to differentiate between the different political options because simply the same consultants work for everybody. So ultimately what is really different is the leader, the leadership. Now, if the leader is important, it's because although issues are real, but trustworthiness is fundamental. George Lakoff, one of the most important political cognitive scientists, writes, issues are real. So issues are, in the political debate, issues are real, as are the facts of the matter. But issues are also symbolic of values and trustworthiness. You have to trust. People can tell you wonderful things. Every politician will tell you wonderful things. Some not, but that's really an exception. But fundamentally, the key thing is if they convey trust, because that's what is going to decide people. Or, to say it in more realistic terms, if they convey less mistrust than the other. People usually vote against, not for, between the two of the lesser of two evils. So because trust and values, the matters that are the most fundamental for the majority of people, that's another thing which is important values are much more important than ideology or interest for people to vote. People don't vote in terms of their class interest or any interest. People vote in terms of their values, fundamentally. A whole stream of cognitive research has established that people believe what they want to believe. They are not convinced. They believe what they want to believe. They read the newspaper that is going to support their views. They watch the television program that is going to support what they already think. And by the way, this is a fundamental business model in our world, which has been largely popularized by Murdoch, who, Fox News, for instance, has become the example of non-traditional professional journalism. Fox News does not pretend to be objective. Tries to be entertaining, interesting, documented, well done, but not true. It's not the professional thing. What they need to do is to convince the people who already think like them to give them arguments. Well, this is a very successful business model because they found that 25% of people in America are always on the extreme conservative position. Even now, Obama is largely hegemonic in American public opinion, but 25% always think in very conservative terms. Well, if you have 25% of the market, that's a good business model, you know? So that was, now, interesting enough, Murdoch is not a conservative himself. He is, but doesn't matter. He doesn't behave as a conservative. He's a businessman. Because that's the key issue. Media are business. First of all, media are business. Even when they are government media, they also are business, except in, let's say, totalitarian societies. Even there, they have to compete between different government channels. Now, because of that, Murdoch, for instance, in America, gives ideology to the Republicans and money to the Democrats. He gives much more money to the Democratic candidate, for instance, to Hillary Clinton in the last election, than to the Republican candidate. Like this, he wins all the time. In Britain, he supported Labour under Blair, and at the same time, his newspapers support ideological positions. But the fundamental thing that I'm trying to say is that there is a model, a business model of journalism which consists in supporting what people already believe. Which explains, for instance, in the study I did on American public opinion and the Iraq War, that in 2007, 4 years after all the evidence about the reality of no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, about what happened in 9/11, had already been published, recorded in the American Congress, etc. Still, 50% of Americans thought that they actually, weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq. And 30% that Saddam Hussein did 9/11 together with Al-Qaeda. So experiments show again and again that if you present evidence that goes fundamentally against what you really want to hear, is 5 times more difficult to register than evidence that follows what you already want to hear. Okay? And that's extremely important because the whole architecture of conviction and power and mind sharing is that you provide people the truth and then people react and follow the truth. Well, first there is no truth, second people don't care. Now, if politicians are the face of politics, is the trust that people convey is the most important thing. Trust, honesty, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to protect you, if that's the important thing, then the most important way of fighting politics is to what we call character assassination. That is, you destroy the credibility by showing how bad the person is, how corrupt the party is, how unreliable the promises are. So, denouncing corruption or fabricating the denouncement of corruption. Or in between, which is that, in fact, in most cases, there is no need to invent too much. because there is so much corruption anyway, that it's a matter of highlighting something or finding something, unfortunately. And to some extent, anything that is not very clear in the political world is ultimately known. Among other things, because most political leaders are men, and men like to brag about this or that. They always end up talking to some friend, and always someone finds out. And there is a whole market of intermediaries, of political consultants and political gossip. And because everybody could do it, everybody has to stockpile ammunition just in case. So everybody is in the same game. It's like nuclear weapons, right? You are not going to start the nuclear war, but just in case you have nuclear weapons. So the same thing with political denunciations in terms of corruption. That's what is called scandal politics. Scandal politics has become the predominant form of politics in the entire world. John Thompson, among many others, has analyzed scandal politics as the symbolic destruction of the trustworthiness of the opponent. Now, with my students at the Annenberg School of Communication in Los Angeles, we actually went through an inventory of political crisis, government crisis, regime crisis in the last 20 years, and we found that in 90% of the cases, the fall of the government, the change of the regime, the fall of a political leader was directly related to scandal politics. However, what evidence shows is that scandal politics per se has two kinds of effects. The first one is the effect on the person who is the object of the attack. This varies. Sometimes the person is destroyed in his political career, but not always. It really changes. In some cases, for instance, one famous case in which not only the attack, but the reality of the scandal did not have much effect on the popularity of the leader was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, after going into television, looking into the eyes of the American people and saying, I didn't do it. So he did it. He probably thought he didn't do it, but he did. And after that, all the surveys show that people didn't care too much. And the reason is very interesting. They are all the same. All the politicians do the same, and they all lie. And since they're all liars, well, we better have our liar who is more sympathetic than the other liar. However, what the data also show is that sometimes scandals destroy a political option, political party, or political leader. Sometimes not, depends very much on the context. There are cases in both senses, but universally, they destroy something deeper, the trust in democracy and in democratic politics as a whole. So there is an overwhelming crisis of legitimacy in the entire world, and this is statistically related to scandal politics. Because if you hear again and again all the dirty things about politics, about everyone and everything in politics, then ultimately there is mistrust on the entire political system. At this point, data show that the trend is increasing, by the way. The last 10 years, and increasing, over 2/3 of citizens in the world think they are not governed democratically, that the governments are not representatives of the people. And this is true also of Europe. And this is also true of the United States. Things are, from time to time, there is a change in that. Obama is somewhat an exception. We'll talk about Obama later. I'm going to go in detail on the Obama campaign and presidency. But the general trend in the world is the disbelief in the democratic value of democracy. And this is very much related to scandal politics. Now, don't ask me then what I should do, because one of the most frustrating things of my work is that I expose the problems, I never give solutions. The reason is simple. You have to find the solutions. Because if people don't find the solutions, if institutions and leaders don't find the solutions, imagine if sociology would have to find the solution. That would be a catastrophe. I'm not irresponsible enough to propose any solution. It's enough that I try to understand and show how things work. Now, the issue is that because the public space has been captured in the media space, since the media space is largely shaped, not the entire control, but largely shaped by business and governments, that set the political parameters in terms of the system. Until very recently, there was no way to open that relatively close media space. Now, this is not to say that journalists have to repeat exactly what their editors and their corporations would tell them. But this is to say that they always have to work within the mechanism of control set up by the media corporation, which had been very well studied, and we know very well, is indexing the topics in terms of the interest, is agenda setting, saying you talk about this and not talk about that, and then the notion of pluralism, yes, it's pluralism, but within what is news. And the difference between opinion and information means that, you know, this is opinion, this is information, so you inform but don't say anything about it. So it's not ideological censorship. This was the communist regime. This is not about censorship. It's about shaping news, shaping topics, shaping things in terms that attract the audience in order to sell more advertising, of course. But that's really the kind of control. It's not, the corporate control is not ideological control in general. It's control in terms of framing whatever has to be conveyed to the population at large in terms of the business strategy of the medium which is providing the information. Now all this has completely changed in the last 10 years, and even more so in the last 5 years, through the emergence of what I call mass self-communication, which is, of course, the internet, but it's also the digitization of media, which allows everything to be connected to everything, and it's also wireless communication, and the explosion of wireless communication, and therefore the connection between the internet and wireless communication. There is digital divide, but not really important these days. There is a digital divide between the first world and the third world, and there is digital divide fundamentally in terms of age. Meaning when my generation disappeared, there is no more digital divide in the development. It's fundamentally a matter of age. It's different in terms of broadband, the quality of the access. But in terms of access, less and less so. This is fading away very quickly. If we talk about the planet as a whole, internet in fact is an old technology. That's one of the interesting things. It was deployed first in 1969 in the United States. But it only exploded in the 1990s for a number of conditions that we can discuss later, that was mainly institutional and technological, and then one wonderful guy named Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, and instead of patenting it, just put it on the web, so that everybody could connect to everybody. And he didn't make money, but he changed the world. after all, you cannot eat and drink so much. So ultimately, changing the world is more interesting in pure hedonistic terms. So in 1996, the first survey about internet in the world was 40 million users. Today is 1.5 billion. But it's actually the rate of diffusion has slowed down because of the fact that the developing world, the key issue is the connection between the internet and wireless communication. Because in 2002, the number of wireless subscribers, meaning numbers, okay, became larger, higher than the number of landlines. And since then, in many countries, simply there are no more landlines. The landlines are not set, except in the large metropolitan areas of fiber optic for high-speed communication. Everything else is being wireless, and this is absolutely essential, because the more wireless increases technology and capacity, the more you create the conditions for the ubiquitous internet access under any conditions and everywhere. Wireless communication. In 1991, first survey about users of wireless communication. There were 9 million. No, excuse me. There were 16 million. 16 million. 16 million in 1991. Of subscribers, not devices, not phones, numbers. Now, we have 3.8 billion, which, of course, for a planet that is 6.5 billion, you can calculate, and if we have a multiplier factor, a very conservative one, counting that babies still don't use mobile phones for the time being, soon, for the time being, and that in many countries one village has a phone, and families, entire families have a phone, it's about 65% of the population of the planet that has access to some form of communication at this point. And of course, in advanced countries, or in very talkative countries, there are more numbers of cell phones than people. By very talkative countries, I mean Argentina. The coverage is 125% of the population can be made. Of course, Italy and Spain also, they are 115% and so on and so on. The United States, though, it's still under 90% at this point, because they believe this myth that free competition with no regulation is better for everybody, and it didn't work. Europe, using the Nordic standards first, and then established a number of connections and agreements between countries and corporations, created a much dense network, and much more effective network than the United States. And the result is Europe is way more advanced than the United States in wireless communication, in terms of use, and therefore in terms of market and technology. Now, the fact that there is a new system of communication created the basis for extraordinary levels of initiative by people, just people, not just corporations, not just government, not just media, people appropriating themselves this extraordinary communication power and creating all kinds of things. To start with, some kids, good kids, literally kids, teenagers or people in their 20s, would develop things like Facebook, like the social networking in the internet, MySpace, etc., like file sharing and P2P networks, and then the YouTube and the later one, Twitter. That is all kind of what is called now social media, which have brought in these hundreds of millions of people into new forms of direct communication, which are largely uncontrolled. I'll discuss later about the efforts to control, which fail all the time, but largely uncontrolled. blogs. Suddenly, everybody creates a newspaper. They are, at this point, there are about 120 million blogs. There were 26 million in 2006. There is about 2 million new blog posts every day. And the blogosphere by the end of 2008 was 80 times bigger than in 2003 and keeps doubling every 6 months. It's an ocean. And that was blogs, but Twitters now are the thing. And by the way, this is a multilingual and international communication space. English was dominant in the early stages, but not anymore. Not anymore, by any means. English accounts for less than a third of blog posts. Of course, the largest one is Chinese, of course, and keeps growing. Now, it is true to say that blogs are only some form of communication. Blogs, I'm going to say something quickly about the other, but blogs, in the United States, 52% of bloggers say they post for themselves. It's what I call electronic autism.